So we put together this panel to kind of show you some of the fun stuff that we're doing that's helpful to policy research in general and the university at large. So joining us today from the far right, we have Dinorah, who is joining from the Gov Lab, which is on Tandon's campus. And she's a fellow with the Gov Lab, and they do a lot of really neat work. And I have the bios in all of your folders. It's the pink sheet if you want to read in more detail, but I'll just do a broad intro, and we'll dig in, and feel free to approach the panelists after the presentation and pick their brains about whatever you're interested in. To her left, we have Louise Simon. She's from the University I'm going to mess this up, NYU Enterprise Initiatives Office. Is that right, Louise? Yes, and Louise does planning and administration, and there's a lot of projects and moving parts in that office. She's involved in a lot of online distance education initiatives and technology-based initiatives for New York University. To her left, we have Russ Hamberger, NYU's Associate Provost, who oversees the Office of Academic Program Review, as well as overseeing me with state authorization and kind of being the foundation for the build that we do on this project. And then you guys all know me. So first I'm gonna show you a short video that we have about this project, and then we can launch into a discussion for any questions that you have, and the panelists can share kind of their role in making this possible and some exciting future directions for it. The NYU State Authorization Advisor is kind of the first attempt to eliminate the need to read the laws and regulations, but still be able to know what's going on and comply.
State Authorization Advisor tool is, in its simplest terms, an expert system.
Expert systems are one of the first forms of artificial intelligence. They started in the 1970s, and their main objective is how can we translate what we know to a computer.
It makes available in a very easily accessible way information about this complex reality of regulation and process to a user who does not need to be expert to tap the system. So you're asked very, very simple questions.
Are you a public or private? Are you a for-profit or a not-for-profit?
Do you have a distance ed program? Do you send students to be for internships or clinical experiences?
What kind of activity, if any, are you undertaking in this state? Are you soliciting students in the state? Are you advertising within the state? Are you admitting students from the state?
And by virtue of the simple information you enter, it gives you a huge amount of well-focused, up-to-date, concrete information back.
You then get this very pretty report, and it's state by state, so you can look at your enrollment numbers and you can say, okay, our enrollments are highest in this state. What is the process to comply in this state?
This tool should become one of the critical pieces for university decision-making.
It empowers you to click one button and track and say, okay, there's 20 states we need to do something in. We have now done something in 10 of them. We're 50% compliant.
You don't want my time as a thoughtful university manager to be spent simply going over mechanically stuff that an algorithm could do in a nanosecond.
3 years ago when my boss said to me, what is our compliance rate? I would say, give me 4 days. But with the State Authorization Advisor tool, I can check off the box when I'm done, and I can log in, and as my boss is asking me at my desk, I can say to him, hang on 1 second, type, 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 we're at 74% compliance, and I'm working on Connecticut next.
With a tool of this sort, you create an enabling environment for that kind of coordinated conversation.
We've brought together a policy analyst, a social scientist, higher ed administrators, representatives from our general counsel, programmers, coders, to really come together with the ultimate shared goal of producing a tool that makes the process of understanding and complying with state authorization seamless. We know from our own experience what that's like, and we want to help make it easier for others.
So that is a little high-level overview of the research that we've been putting together. We have a demo video of what the actual tool looks like, and we can send that out if anybody's interested in watching it later. But for now, I'd just like some of the big pieces of the pie that brought this all together to tell us a little bit about their experience, kind of the collaboration that made something like this possible. NYU has been a leader in the state authorization area and has always been kind of on the forefront of innovation for how to comply and working towards that, and that's in large part due to the people at this table. So Dinorah, if you can start us off and just share a little bit about the Governance Lab, your work on stuff like this previously for policy initiatives and stuff in that area.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I've been working at the GovLab now for a year and a half. Our founder, Beth Novak, was one of the first, was in one of the first cohorts of open government with the Obama term. And the whole reason why the GovLab was created was to figure out how can technology help us solve public problems. So how can we use technology to improve governance, to open governance, to open and create new ways of collaboration? For example, how is it possible that we are still using a mechanism created when the press was created, which is voting? How can it be possible that that's one of the few ways we have to express our political will? And how can new technologies create those kind of interactions and allow for experts to give their meaningful advice on the very specific issues that we are all trying to solve as a nation or as a city or just as an institution like NYU. The broad picture is we explore open data. How can the government data be used to improve private institutions, private sectors? How can also the private sector share their data, in what framework, so that the government can create and take more data-driven solutions, find data-driven solutions to public problems. We also explore the space of internet governance. How can we keep the internet without a centralized power governing everything we do on it? We also work with specific governments, trying to help them to find the expert they need for various areas of innovation, with the network of innovators. And my work is on the GovLab Academy, where we are trying to accelerate public innovation and civic innovation, civic technology by entrepreneurs, also by people inside the government, by nonprofits, by academia. They come with a project, we group them, we create a network, and then we find them an expert to coach them into a very agile process of design. And that's kind of the interaction we established with NYU, and specific problem we wanted to solve or figure out what the problem was and how can we make this ecosystem of compliance easier for NYU and also for other universities. So we said there's a knowledge that we already been gathering for years, that Brianna has been working on it hardly, but that knowledge is scarce. The expertise is scarce, there is a high demand, the problems are concurrent, they occur, like with talking to Brianna, we found out that she receives about 30 requests per month with kind of the same questions, but just configuring very specific variables differently. So what do you do when you have a high demand and the expertise is scarce, and there's a logical process to solve those problems? And that's when expert systems can give us a very good option for us to try to make automatic what can be automatic. So as I said in the video, expert systems are the first form of artificial intelligence, and it just means that they attempt to imitate the problem-solving ability of a human expert. So when can you create an expert system? As long as the expertise can translate into a specific set of rules or reasoning, you can just map it out. It's been used as as advisors for training, for scenario building, scenario planning, and also to just capture knowledge. For example, now the knowledge NYU has been accumulated is in a few heads. So how can you translate that knowledge into something logical that anyone can just come, read, and understand in a systemic way? So the components of an expert system are the knowledge base, the inference engine, and the user interface. Our help was, at the GovLab, what we tried to collaborate with was on the user interface aspect, and also trying to do this back and forth, designing the inference engine. So they already had the knowledge, but how can we translate it to if-then rules, to specific questions, and then how are you going to link, depending on what the user selects, how are you going to create the reasoning so the machine knows what to show in the report. And that's the whole process. It's step 1, gathering the knowledge. Step 2, map it. Step 3, test, iterate, receive feedback, improve. We recently had some interviews with some Dean Liaisons, the director of user experience of the GovLab, called some of you, and our main takeaway was that there are additional stakeholders that need to be added to the loop and make the system more integral, in the sense that it's not only the Dean Liaisons that need to know what you can do and what you can't, and then how long you have to wait for it to happen or for you to be able to perform specific activity in the state. It also has to do with your marketing teams. It also has to do with your practice coordinator. And we are trying now to figure out a report that takes into consideration the different stakeholders and just says and determines in a very, very simple way, this is what you can do and what you can't, and this is relevant for each of the areas that are related or have to do or have any activity that's important for the compliance world.
And I'll chime in, and to kind of relate back to the meeting discussion that we just had, Russ kicked off the meeting with sharing one liaison per school. I know a lot of you have called the office and said, can you just talk to Bob? Can you talk to Sally? Can you talk to Sherry? And because of the small staff size at the central office level, we're not always able to expand to communicate with as many people within your schools as you'd like us to. So that's the problem that we approached Dinorah with, and being able to create a system that can communicate more broadly with the many stakeholders that you guys have expressed a want for us to communicate with is the real sweet spot to the solution that their team is figuring out for us in terms of how we all work together and the formality of the steps within the process.
Yeah, and we first started with an outside look. So what do we know as NYU that then can be translated and systematized in a way that other universities can take advantage of the knowledge we already gathered and mapped? But then we decided to start with an internal look, and say, okay, which are the interactions that can be replaced, that can be systematized for NYU? And once we have those solved, once we understand the trends of each of the schools, the data points, which are the things that are being more required from which states, use that data to then make the decision of which state to pursue after, etc. And then once we have that working out, they maybe go back again, take a look to the exterior. So and that's the nature of a process. That's the nature of an agile design. You have to start mapping out, figure out if it works, if it doesn't, if you can optimize for something better. We first start optimizing for the exterior, then we change the route, optimizing for the interior. But in that sense, that's one of the approaches. At the GovLab, we are trying to also do with even with governments, take more into consideration your users, your citizens, make them enjoy interacting with you instead of just making it feel like it's taking forever for nothing, making you repeat the same things over and over and over again. So it's just more or less what we've been doing together.
That's great. Thank you, Dinorah. One thing that came up in the video, Diana Carafin, NYU's Director of Assessment and Evaluation, had a powerful statement about the collaboration that made this possible. And she listed bringing together social scientists, policy experts, attorneys, kind of different moving parts. And Louise's role in the project has been really integral in kind of how do you bring these diverse technical expertise together, and how do you get them to speak the same language and function on the same calendar and path. So Louise, if you want to talk a little bit about kind of your experience of technology and law and higher ed and kind of the intersection and just what it's like to bring all the talent together. I think so often when I tell people about this system that we've put a lot of effort and time into creating, the response is, well, I'm really interested in healthcare and we could do this for X, Y, and Z. So I can imagine that a lot of you are sitting there thinking, what could this be replicated for? And learning more about how Louise brought all the pieces together could apply to many different industries.
University Enterprise Initiatives looks at how to enhance or modify existing activities using technology to increase efficiencies and or reach a wider audience. And looking at state authorization compliance, which is one so individualized by state, by school, and also there's one person really managing it. It was a great opportunity to see how we can get the information down so that not just one person has it. It could be reached to so much more people. And so we looked around at who has the subject matter experts to build a system that can collaborate, automate, and empower users to have access to information themselves without having to go to Brianna each time. So I've been at in UEI for about a year and a half now, but just at the beginning, my boss had already met with Russ's office and Brianna and started to get a team together. So we had the subject matter expert in state authorization compliance, which is Brianna, but then we also reached out to the GovLab, and NYU is just full of really smart people with great skills. So we just went to departments and schools who had the right, the right skill set to build this tool. And it's just very empowering when the right people come together because it does increase efficiencies. You do have access to information that is already existing, and we're not creating anything that people don't have access to already, but we're putting it in a format that is so much more accessible at a touch of a button rather than having to wait or do the research. The skills, bringing skills together and capacity building it's time consuming for one group. So we have the resources to do that, and that makes it easier and for the whole rest of the university. And so it's been a learning curve. It's the first, I think, of this type in the country. Yeah. And so we've had a lot of feedback. We're using consultants with market research. And as we get this research and assess the needs, we just adapt the tool and adapt our experts to meet the requirements of what is needed.
Welcome to the NYU State Authorization Advisor Demo. The advisor was created to provide higher education institutions with tailored insight into the actions and costs related to state compliance. By asking a series of diagnostic questions, the advisor generates a detailed report, budget, and action plan to help you ensure that your institution is adhering to regulations in all the states in which you are conducting activity. So let's get started. So the first thing I'll do is click on this login link in the upper right corner. Now, the first time you log into the advisor, you'll be asked to enter some information about yourself and your institution. Make sure to answer all of these questions the first time you log in, since your answers to questions like, "Are you a member of SARA?" and "Your institution's home state or territory" will be used later to generate your customized report. So I'll go ahead and select Arizona as my home state for the purposes of this demo. Once you've filled out all the information on this form, you just click on this big Create button to create your profile. And once you click on that, you'll be taken to your dashboard, which is where you can start entering information about your programs into the advisor. And based on the information that you enter, the advisor will generate this color-coded map telling you in which states you are already compliant or in which states you need to take action in order to ensure compliance. And you can see that this profile that I'm using has already been pre-populated with a ton of existing data for the purposes of this demo. The first time you log in, the map will look more like this. And you can see here that none of the states are color-coded because no information has been entered about any of them. But let's go back to my existing profile, and then let's begin by checking my compliance and authorization in the neighboring state of New Mexico. So to begin, I'll click on the state on the map. Now here is where the magic begins. If you've ever used a tax preparation software like TurboTax, this interface will be very familiar to you. The advisor will ask you a series of questions about your institution and your program to help you determine the steps towards compliance in a given state. Now you can see that the first question I get is about the nature of my institution, and I'm told I should select all that apply. So, for the purposes of this demo, I'll select that my institution is a private, nonprofit, degree-granting institution. And then once I've checked off all that apply, I'll click this Next button at the bottom of the screen. The next question asks if my institution is accredited by an agency recognized by both the Department of Education and the New Mexico Higher Education Department. Now, just to show you a quick example of how the system responds intelligently to your input, I'll go ahead and select No, and then click on the Next button. You'll see the advisor will immediately inform me that my institution is not eligible to become authorized in that state because New Mexico requires recognized accreditation. Institutions without it are not allowed to seek approval with the New Mexico Higher Education Department. But since we want to get a little further on for the purposes of this demo, we'll go ahead and scroll back up and click on Yes. And then I'll click the Next button at the bottom to get to the next question. Now, along the way, you might discover questions for which you need clarification or additional information. The advisor anticipates this by offering tips and links for additional information about the law and policy in a given state. For example, on this question, do you employ any agents who recruit students within New Mexico? There's a little tip down here labeled, What is a recruiting agent?, which you can click on to get a more detailed description of exactly what a recruiting agent is and whether you actually have any. And I see that for New Mexico regulations, a recruiting agent is an individual paid by an institution to solicit enrollments. Select No if your institution's employees or agents conduct only occasional recruiting of residents of New Mexico. So I'll go ahead and click No, since my fictional institution does not have anyone devoted solely to recruiting students in New Mexico. And then I'll click the Next button. And when I get to the next question, which asks about professional licensure, I'll see that there are actually two different tips that I can click on to get more information about why this is important and more information about licensure within New Mexico. So I'll go ahead and click No, and then click Next. So that's the basic idea for checking to see if your institution is compliant in a given state. I won't make you sit through me answering all of these questions, so with a little cooking show magic, let's skip to the end of the questionnaire so we can see the report that is generated. Okay, so here I am on the last question, which asks about my institution's gross revenue generated from tuition from New Mexico-based students. So I'll enter $180,000, and then I can click on one of two buttons below, which appear at the end of the questionnaire. The big button on top is Generate Report, which I'll demonstrate in just a moment. But before I click that, let's look at this Invite Someone to Review Answers button. I click on that, and you'll see I get a popover window, which will allow me to enter the name and email of someone else at my institution. Now, this is useful in case you answered any questions that you weren't sure of, or if you need approval from someone else higher up at your institution, or if you need someone else at your institution to confirm certain activity within a given state. But we won't do that for now. For now, we'll just click on this big Generate Report button. And the next thing I'll see is my report telling me what my institution has to do to comply within New Mexico, which you'll see right here, the main thing I have to do is apply for authorization, right? And if I scroll down a little further, it'll give me more information, like what the total fees will be for becoming authorized within New Mexico, what the fees will be for licensing institutions, and, most importantly, it will give me the contact information for the person I need to reach out to apply for authorization. So I may want to print this report or come back to it later, which I can do through my dashboard. And once I return to my dashboard, we'll see that New Mexico has now turned yellow, just like the other states where action is recommended for this institution to be compliant. NYU's State Authorization Advisor offers both detailed reports for a given state and a bird's-eye view of your activity within all states, giving you the detailed information you need to plan your academic programming and focus your recruitment efforts within any of the 50 states.
Great. And this demo video was actually made a few months ago. So what's interesting about Dinorah's statement in the beginning of the conversation about we started from the outside in, you saw a lot of those initial questions talked about what is your institution, for-profit or nonprofit. Obviously, NYU is a nonprofit and has no plans to switch to a for-profit anytime ever that we know of. You can see elements of how the project evolved with this agile model in the demo. It looks a little different now, and there's more of a focus, like the element of sending it to somebody else. A lot of people in the units will say, I want to do marketing and advertising, but can you talk to my marketing person to figure out what they have planned and where? So there's an element where you could send it to somebody else, and your marketing person could reply to the marketing questions. So it's evolving. It's in a beta phase, and it has a lot of potential to, I think, help a lot of the work that we all collaborate to do together. I know that we're coming up on our time and a lot of you need to leave, so please feel free to do so. But we're here if you guys have any questions, and we're happy to chat about anything further. And if anybody wants individual meetings to talk about the results of their data or of the panel or anything in general, feel free to reach out. There's evals from the meeting in the middle of your table. If you have a moment to just fill them out, they're brief. They're only 4 questions. We'd really appreciate it.
And I would just like to say that if you can imagine something that can work better, it probably can. So it's just a matter of then creating the team and figuring out how to do it. But that's, I think, the mission of any educational institution, and we are always happy to help in-house and try to create new solutions for old problems.
Could you clarify what the plan is for rolling out? Like you said, it's in beta. Is it with whom is it being tested? And like, what's the outlook? So, because it looks great, but I'm just wondering where does it go from here, and when can we expect it?
So, our team is still working on mapping the information that goes into this. We hope they will be done in February at some time. And then that information goes to the GovLab, and they will get a scope of work and a quote from a vendor who's going to put the front end together, if I understand that right. And that should be done pretty quickly. And so sometime mid to late spring, we hope, if things go well. It's a complicated process because people are reading reading regulations. Someone double checks what they have mapped out, the decision tree, and then sometimes they're not clear, and we have to call a regulator and say, what do you mean by this? Also, as Brianna said earlier, states are changing regulations, so we're going to have to probably do another check, I think, to make sure we're up to date, because this doesn't work if it's not up to date. So our hope is mid to late spring.
User tested with you, like with the Dean liaisons, with the people that interact in the ecosystem. That's where we're going to engage you with the user testing.
People at the various schools.
Yeah. And then the hope is that this will, as I think we've said, is if you have questions someone in your school, instead of calling Brianna, the first step would be to use this, get some answer where you can or where you can't go, and then what may have to be done to get approval. Also, we'll be using it, Brianna will be using it to help all of you to, the first go-around as we've worked on the 81 agencies was basically Brianna reading every regulation and then figuring out by hand, on a piece of paper, and then working with Diana Carafin to come up with some program that calculated how much money was going to cost so we could go to the provost and say, this is how much money over 3 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars that were going to be needed to get NYU 100% compliant. So it's going to make everybody's work hopefully a lot easier.
Hi, John Stevens from the law school. So that looks great. It looks like a really simplified tool for what I try and keep in my head for an online program. I'm curious because, as you know, a lot of the questions I get are about international applicants. You know, can I apply to your program? I'm from Brazil, and so we get a national level as well as a state level. You know, Toronto. I'm from Quebec. I'm from here. I'm from there. If this goes well, down the road, we should consider adding in sort of an international component.
Yeah, one step at a time, John. This has been taking us a while. First to find people who can quite frankly, who can analyze state regulations and know how to map things out. But yeah, certainly as NYU is not just the law school, but other programs are going into enrolling students from other countries online, that would be a future step. It'll make it a lot easier than reading the 150 pages or 300 pages we got from the Cooley Law Firm on only a handful of countries. So, but that's going to take a lot of work, and those countries are a lot more complicated.
Yeah, a little less critical because there isn't the federal funding tied to it necessarily.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, another question, and I'm not sure where this question intersects specifically with the authorization advisor, but it's related to distance education. Earlier in the presentation, the various categories. One of the categories included part-time, paid or compensated work. This year, I just started recently in this department, but twice this year I collected from our faculty, information about their students and internships and that sort of thing, and no one provided anything related to part-time employment. The reason I'm asking this is because this is the School of Professional Studies, and I'm specifically at the non-traditional undergraduate. And so we have a high percentage of students that have jobs, in some cases full-time or part-time. But I think that there's very possibly students that are in employment fields where they're being compensated, where it relates in some way to whatever degree or concentration they're pursuing. And so I'm wondering whether that's something we need to be thinking about, because let's say they're studying here, but their part-time job is in Connecticut or New Jersey, so it's outside of, so is that anything
Yeah, that's a great question. It was a question about, in general, the type of job that a student may have, in this case being a part-time job, and is that something we need to be concerned with for compliance? And that slide that talked about what type of engagement students were doing is actually something that doesn't really matter for compliance. It was just something that schools expressed an interest in learning more about what students were doing where. The category specifically of part-time employment came up because a large proportion of the data that we pulled came from the Wasserman Career Centers portal. So a lot of the students use that just to kind of create profiles and keep track of accomplishments during their study. So if they have a part-time job, they might enter it in and generate a profile to kind of remember what they did over the course of 4 to 6 years of studying. So for compliance purposes, it's not an issue if they're doing a part-time job and a part-time student, and it happens to be in the same category of their work, but it's not for credit or required for curriculum purposes. So that was more of like an interesting data point that evolved through looking at the data and the trends than a concern for compliance.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? John?
Oh, yeah. There was in the newsletter, there was a policy update from Capitol Hill notice about what disclosures we have to make in terms of complaint processes, and it mentioned that we were going to address this in the meeting. I'm not sure if I missed that or not. I just have a generic link to the SHIO website with all their laundry list of procedures on our website, but I'm wondering if there's...
Yeah, that's a great, thank you for bringing that up. Always on the ball, John. There are complaint procedures that came out that we need to make information available to our students of where they can complain to if they feel their grievances weren't settled to their liking within the university structure. NYU just went through an audit from the federal government to look at all of this stuff. So in preparing for the audit, we made sure that we were in compliance, and that information of where they can complain to is on NYU's website in general. So originally, when the newsletter went out, we were thinking that it would be the responsibility of each school to post that, but it was decided just for efficiency and ease of everybody's life and happiness that we would kind of have that at a central level available on NYU's website and not have the schools be responsible for getting that to every student. So that actually has resolved itself, which is very nice because it's one less thing we all have to do.
But if you have it on your website, don't take it down. Okay. Just one other point that came up last week when I was at the Middle States Annual Conference, and they were talking about there were 8 items of federal regulations that Middle States and all regional accrediting agencies are required by the feds to make sure their member institutions are in compliance with. And that was, it was up to the institution to define what a complaint was. So, there are, and so to the extent that we have to keep records and have a policy, we can be specific as to what is covered by that policies. So the fact that, I don't know, all my classes, scheduled at 8 a.m. or something like that, that's, or why didn't I get a response sooner? That's not, that can be defined as not a complaint under the record keeping and policy, procedures that we have. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much. Everyone have a great day, and thanks for coming, and happy holidays to wherever you're off to.
Thank you.